presentation. My name is Sally Deckard, and I am a faculty support and classroom consultant in the Faculty Affairs Department at UAGC, and I will be your host of the session. By joining us today, you acknowledge that this session is being recorded and will be shared with other TLC-related materials. Microphones will be muted for this presentation, but we encourage you to post questions and comments in the chat. Also, we have enabled live transcription. If you would like to use it, click the live transcription button at the bottom of your Zoom window. And now I'm very pleased to introduce to you Dr. Yvonne Lozano, Department Chair of the UAGC Department of Health Sciences.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's always great to be here at TLC, and I hope everyone's just enjoying this great conference that we've had put on these last couple of days. I know I myself have really enjoyed the presentations. Love learning. We wouldn't be here if that's not part of what we love to do in our work life. As we start to move forward with this presentation, speaking on resiliency is just something I've always been interested in, but over the last probably 5 or 6 years, I've started to pay more attention to it, reviewed more research, kind of paid attention to it in other presentations that I've done. As a gerontologist, I often speak to caregivers, adult caregivers who are caring for whether family members, spouses, partners with some form of dementia. And in speaking with them, I've learned so many things about this term of resiliency. While it may not be a scientific knowledge that so much of this was based on, or so much what I know, but hearing it from them themselves, hearing it from caregivers, and some of the experiences that they had has really helped me kind of add a tremendous amount of what I think is value to the presentation and some of the findings. This is a short presentation. I don't think I've ever done this presentation in 30 minutes, and I'm going to do my best, and I have my colleagues are going to help me stay on task here. Please feel free to post any questions you may have in the chat, and we'll answer some of those as we moved along. Some of you may have taken the time to respond to the poll that I put out there. There were like 4 or 5 different questions, but I asked in one of the polls to please describe in one word your coping skills. And what I found, number one, that was amazing was number one, people's sense of humor, and other things that I found is the individualism that was so much tied to that question, the different words that people chose that really felt close to how they were able to identify their coping skills. And a lot of this presentation is based on that, in order to kind of move through this process and this sea of resiliency and adaptation and coping skills. So much of it is really our individual personal adaptation to life as we move forward. I saw this quote. I did this presentation for Blue Cross Blue Shield, and I found this quote by Ernest Hemingway that I thought was a perfect fit, especially over the last couple of years as we started to, as we made our way through COVID and many other things, many of the societal challenges that we were faced with. But the world breaks everyone, and afterward, many are strong at the broken places. And it reminded me of an experience I had when I was a freshman, maybe a sophomore in college. I had made it through, I played college softball, played high school, and I just don't remember ever not playing softball in my younger days. And so and through all that, I never really broke anything. I don't know how that happened, playing ball and being a student athlete. But for the first time in that part of my life, I broke a finger. A friend of mine wasn't paying attention and slammed and everybody knows how that feels, but slammed my finger into a door. And I had always prided myself in not ever break anything. And I was convinced, even as I went to the emergency room, my friends took me that it was not broken, that it was just hurt really bad. And so what amazed me was how I reacted. Once I got to the emergency room, and the doctor, of course, took an x-ray, and I was telling my friends that were in the room with me, no, it's not broken. I've never broke anything. It's not broken. I could feel this whole I could feel this level of anxiety building up in me that wanted to fight that whole question of whether or not it was broken. I had already decided I wasn't going to accept it was broken. I had already decided that the pain that I was feeling was due to something different, just getting my hand slammed in the door. And so when the doctor came, I'm laughing because you're going to find out why in a minute. When the doctor came into the emergency room and he put the x-rays on the wall for me to see, and he said, well, you didn't only just break your finger in one place, looked like it's broken probably in 10, it's shattered. I passed out. And I hadn't passed out before that because I had convinced myself that it wasn't broken. But somewhere deep inside me, I didn't want it to be broken. And so I feared that. And so I passed out and they brought me back and obviously, but it was amazing what my mind was doing at that particular time, how I was trying to cope with it. And coping with it was, for one thing, probably not accepting the reality. If I look back on it now, I had to know that that finger was broken, and I refused to look at that. And the one thing that the doctor said to me that made me even more interested in this particular slide, in this quote from Hemingway, was that he said, you know what, that's now going to be your strongest finger of all the 10 that you have because you've broken it. And of course, at that age, it didn't make any sense to me. I didn't know what he meant by that. And later found out that in some way it is. And so it really helped me relate to this, what you see here. And I don't think that most of us, as we start to think about facing different stressors in our life, or whether it's a stressful moment, stressful situation, or whether it's a life-changing stressor that occurs for us, I don't think, and those of you who know me, have worked with me long enough, know that I love humor. And anytime that I have an opportunity to share it, I'm going to share it. And I'm going to share it in these slides. So you'll see that as we pop up. So when we think about stressors, and these are just some of the things we think about them as staff, as faculty, as parents, as spouses, as partners, as individuals. But we manage everyday stressors, no matter how small they may be, from a flat tire to, having to pick up a sick kid at school, managing our home, our work, and ourself. A lot of times we forget that self is a part of that management, and especially in developing and starting to somewhat strengthen our level of resiliency. And societal stressors, of course, in crisis also play a part of that. So these are just some in a general term and categorized that we see that were identified in this particular research. I love this slide. I think I love this picture. I had it on my Facebook account for a long time. I think just the adaptive behaviors that we start to learn. And many of the adaptive behaviors are just that. Many of the studies show that these are learned behaviors for some. We find that some works for us and some doesn't, some do not. We might find that, hey, this works for us, but maybe it doesn't work for anybody else around us. And so we still have to make some adjustments. But when we find these stressors or these changes that are occurring in our life, we immediately kind of start to focus and think about these adaptive behaviors and how we can achieve success or be able to move through them. Because the one thing we do know about the stressors in our life, when it occurs for that particular moment, is we do know that they're not going anywhere. Maybe not anytime soon, but there's still going to have to be something they face. I didn't want my finger to be broken, but it was, and so I had to deal with it. So one thing that in this particular article was as an op-ed that was written in the Atlantic journal, those of you who read the Atlantic. But what I found interesting, he talked to someone about reliance, and he talked about that almost no one thrives in isolation. Obviously, we probably have learned that over the past years with COVID. One can improve our well-being with individualistic practices. And this was very evident in that poll that I had at the beginning. Those of you who took time to fill that out, and thank you for that. Those of you who took time, and I found that so many answers were so very different. And I asked people to identify their coping skills in one word, and there was a variety of things, everything from prayer to someone put carbs. I thought that was just, if you think about your one word and describe your coping skills. And those of you who haven't done that, you can put if you were to describe your coping skills in one word, if you can put that in the chat, maybe for us to share. But what was significant was that everyone's were so different. Now, there may be some that would have been alike, but I bet if we get down to how those coping skills or manifest themselves for us individually, we would find that they're still very different. So we can't go at it alone. but we do have self-reliance. But self-reliance doesn't mean isolation, that we kind of find those things within ourselves, that we learn how to think for ourselves, and that we learn how to do it, not necessarily do it in a way that we hear others tell us to do it, but we find our own ways to be resilient. We find our own ways to cope with the stressors that we're faced with. And hopefully those are in a way in which we can be able to work our way through the situation that we're experiencing. So just a little humor break here. So some of you may be wondering, you were going to have a little humor break. Well, this is Yvonne being resilient because I've had this cough for a couple of weeks. And so I find myself needing to take a break to cough. And I thought, well, I don't want to put myself on mute and then people wonder where I went. Well, I can put myself on mute while you're taking the time to read this funny little commercial, I guess, if you will. So we all have these common issues, and these are only some of them. Social anxiety, not feeling safe, generalized fear. Many years ago, when I first started working, took the position at which was Ashford University, now UAGC, I was also working on the weekends. I worked 7 p.m. Till 7 p.m. on Friday till 7 a.m. on Sunday. I was on call at the local emergency rooms here in San Antonio. And there were 5 emergency rooms that I responded to, and I would get a call on my phone and to do what they called psych assessment. So I was kind of like the preliminary psych person before, and then I would refer that person or that individual to the psychiatrist. And many times when I walked into an emergency room, and it was everywhere from children's emergency room to older adults, it didn't matter, all kinds of things that individuals were experiencing, all kind of mental health issues that I worked to kind of assess what was going on with that person. And so when I completed this side and started thinking about some of the experiences that I had with patients at that particular time, you can be rest assured I could fit a lot of slides as to what was going on. It could be anything that people were experiencing. And so many of these patients were reaching out to try to find something to make them feel as if they could get through that particular moment. Some of it was related to medication needing to be adjusted. Others was just a stress or a situation that they were experiencing, whether it was drug abuse, whether it was breaking up with a boyfriend or girlfriend or a spouse, whatever it was. They were trying to find something to help them to be able to get through it. They didn't really see that there was a future for them. They didn't really see that it was always that it would end, that this feeling that they had, whatever they were experiencing, was going to go on and on. Then I sometimes experienced and saw that other side of the spectrum, the individuals who were trying to control the situation, who were doing everything they could to control it and make it be the way they wanted to be, much like I did when I broke my finger. They were, this is the way it's going to be, and everyone's going to cooperate. And I often tell my caregivers, I often say to them, wouldn't our life and our world be so much better if everyone we knew in our life, from our family to our work to our colleagues, did everything we wanted them to do exactly the way we wanted it to happen? Now, we'd all be kind of bored because everybody was doing everything. It would make our lives much easier in some regards, but at the same time, it takes away this whole sense of this individualism and how we manage things. I know it would make, my kid feel better if they would just do things the way that I think would be best for them, then they wouldn't be having all of these problems. It's just not the way in which it works. No one follows the path that you want them to follow, even though you might think, well, I think I've got them under control. I think they're doing exactly what I want them to do. Trust me, behind closed doors, they are still feeling as if they are not really living the life that they want to live. And so they kind of just develop this whole sense of really trying to satisfy that person. So it just kind of goes on from there. But one thing that I've learned in looking at this research also over and over and over again is that so many of our coping skills and our resiliency and our ability to find that resiliency is really within, not only just within ourselves, but also what we've learned growing up. Whoever you grew up with, that we learn a lot of the coping skills from those individuals. And so we may think they're our very own now, but maybe they're not. Maybe there's something that we can do to make them just a little bit better, to make ourselves be able to see things differently, to make ourselves be released from the need to be able to control those things around us. because that whole situation of controlling is what creates this kind of like free flowing anxiety just within ourselves as well. So the definition of resiliencies we see here and with these two researchers as a trait, and you see the trait. I think the trait is really important for those of us to recognize that it does become that. It represents a constellation of characteristics that enable individuals to adapt to the circumstances they encounter, and resilience has a positive impact on individual mental health. For me, professionally, what the most important statement here is, resilience has a positive impact on individual mental health. And so when a lot of individuals are trying to change the circumstances outside of themselves, much like I was doing with my broken finger, I often found that the positive, in order for me to be able to feel better and to feel differently, was how I was going to manage that. So maybe I was at a stage at that point in my life, being in college, being early years in college, in some way thinking to myself, this was not anything that I could control. It was broken. It was broken. There was nothing I could do to change it. I was going to have to decide and find a better way in which to react to it. And you probably hear a lot of that too. Those of you listening to podcasts, reading books, talking with your loved ones, you might say to yourself, I can't change the way that person is behaving, but I can change the way in which I react to what's happening in that situation. And, a lot of times when I talk to caregivers, I said, I have bad news for you guys. It still falls on you. Your situation that you're in is your responsibility to change the way you react to it, but also to polish your resiliency, to polish your coping skills, to find a way in which you can positively impact your mental health. There is still some responsibility there. Now, obviously, there are going to be situations in which a person may say to themselves, I don't have any control over this, or I don't have any control of that person, because maybe there's a certain level of mental illness in which they need professional intervention. But on a daily basis, for most of us, those situations we encounter, it's critical that we look at this in a way in which we can positively affect our mental health. So I'm already seeing that I've run out of time here, but I do want to mention Philo. Philo was this was not Philo, my dog, but Philo was a dog that I had many years ago, about 20 years ago. He was he was born deaf and blind. He was a Dalmatian. And at some point in our lives, when we moved and we bought another home, I was so worried about Philo, because I'm like, Philo knows his way around the house. He knows his way outside. He loved to be outside. He hated to be inside. Believe it or not, there was a dog who loved to be outside. And so we had pretty much this big castle built for him outside. He pretty much did whatever he wanted. You can even throw a ball and Philo would find it. He was just amazing. And so when we moved, I thought, he's just going to freak out. He's going to get depressed. He's going to die. All these, of course, here's my head. Here's all my critical thinking about what's going to happen to Philo. I've already decided what's going to happen. I've already set myself into this anxiety, into this tizzy. And now here I am trying to cope. So what we know is that resiliency is not something you're born with. And I'll tell you about Philo in a little bit. Resilience is not absence of pain, loss, or negative emotion. So because you're strong and you have that resiliency, or you have these coping skills, it doesn't mean that you're not ever going to experience a negative emotion. And it's not a quick fix. It doesn't happen overnight. And you can't just say, try these things and this is going to work for you, because what worked for you last time may not work again. Something you develop over time. It's like emotional IQ of some sort, something that you cultivate and you nurture and you build and you learn skills. I'm sure that all of us can say we learned some of these as we were progressing through our lives over the last few years with COVID and some of those setbacks. It's our ability. I love this last sentence. It says it's our universal ability to thrive in spite of setbacks. That's just a lot of hope. And Philo thrived. Philo got to this new house that I currently live in now. I was out there. I did everything but carry him. I just was so worried about him. He went around, he sniffed around the backyard. He came and asked me for the ball. I threw it. He found it. It was over. He was done. He moved. It took me a year to get used to being in the new home. Then it took him his 10 minutes to be in the backyard. That's kind of embarrassing, but that's true. Philo had quite the resiliency. He was quite the king with that. So our power of our thoughts, as we've already described at the beginning, with me, play a big role. The first thing we want to do is set personal boundaries for ourselves. there are situations that we let ourselves just kind of stay in and melt in and stew in, and we think about it over and over again about how horrible it is, and there's nothing we can do. And so it's important that we recognize that we set boundaries and step away when we have to. Since COVID started, I tried this little trick I'll share with each of you. It's 5 minutes till the hour. At 5 minutes to the hour, if I'm not in a presentation, of course, I take the time to think about what has just happened the last 55 minutes. And that's all I can spend is 5 minutes to the next hour. I can only spend those 5 minutes so that I'm not sitting there brooding and stewing and thinking about how things are. Or I'll call a friend and just kind of ventilate, just kind of get it off my chest. I think of ways of I can practice self-care with it. And those of you who know me know that I'm a gamer. I love to play video games. I have it set up in my office. I just grab my controller and play those video games, or I put on one of my favorite podcasts or some of my favorite music. Those are kind of things that help me to kind of nurture and build my resilience and to reduce any anxiety that I or maybe experiencing. I highly suggest it. So as we start to think about reframing our thoughts, we have to first recognize that we're having that kind of discussion with ourselves in our brain, that discussion you have at night before you go to sleep, thinking about all the things that could have happened differently. Why did I say that? Why did he say that? What did she mean by that? What did he mean by that? Why haven't I finished that? I mean, I remember a couple of weeks ago, I sat up straight at bed at 2 a.m. and realized I had not responded to somebody's email at work. I almost pulled that laptop out and got up and took care of it, but I made myself not do it. I had to recognize that it was not important. And I really doubt that the person who sent me the email was sitting up in his or her bed at 2 a.m. wondering, why hasn't Yvonne responded to that email yet? I don't know where she is. So those are kind of some of the things that we think about. We have to challenge ourselves. When we start to have those thoughts, we have to say to ourselves, what are you doing? Why are you thinking like that? What can I do differently? How can I manage this? How can I manage this differently? And then here's the part that is really important. Then you change it. Now, that doesn't mean just change it for the moment, that you work to change it. Now, there's different levels of this kind of stressors. Some things are, just debilitating health issues, or, deaths in our family or with friends. Those are things that we all learn to kind of cope through. This is just something that's a natural part of life. Unfortunately, maybe obviously not a good part of life, but it's a natural part of life. And we learn to change the way in which we react to things. But at the same time, when we can't change what's happening, we can learn to kind of nurture ourselves through it. And then using positive self-talk. Now, I kind of fluctuate with this back and forth. A lot of the studies often talk about this resiliency and positive self-talk. I have an issue with it sometimes. And the reason I do is because I don't always believe it. Sometimes I don't even believe myself when I try to say something positive to myself. But these are some of the things that we have to think about. Now, these are some of the statements that are there. And so as I read through them, I find myself just going, oh, who's going to say that? I mean, why would you say that to somebody? But you'd be surprised that the more you start to find those right key words within yourself, it does build the resiliency. It does help you kind of manage and get through things. And so I encouraged you to find your own little process of self-talk and whatever it is that works for you. And so last, in looking at coping, it's a support and psychological resilience are two resources in finding ways to cope. Obviously support, whether loved ones, friends, good friends, just having a lunch with some of your best friends, taking that time to kind of make that happen. This is what laughter does for me. It kind of helps me cope with that. And just kind of and also psychological resilience, kind of finding that strength within ourselves to help protect our individual mental health in stressful situations. When you think about when your mental health is impacted in some form or fashion, no matter what level, when it's happening. You know that you need to take a step back. You know that you need to go find that little corner of your room or someplace in your mind to kind of help you cope with that. to kind of help you manage that. And you'll find those things as you move along. I can't say enough. I just want to say, and only because it's worked for me and it may not work for you, but that 5 minute to the hour thing has really worked. And I just kind of came up with it. Now, maybe I heard it somewhere and someone's going to tell me I invented that. Why are you saying you invented it? I don't think I invented it. I just think it's just something that I thought about and it worked for me. And so it's a way that I just spend Yvonne time for those 5 minutes, whether I'm just griping about what happened or griping about what not happened, but it helps me cope and then it just kind of goes away. Okay, before we go to any questions, I wanted to share, this is just a funny celebration of a 100-year-old woman. As a gerontologist, I couldn't let the day go by without sharing some of my favorite gerontology pictures. And this is one of mine. So I think, do we have any questions or comments from anyone?
We had some great comments in the chat.
Okay.
You could tell it really resonated with people, and a few comments that, greatest disappointments have come when other people have not met my expectations. When I'm struggling with being resilient and feeling vulnerable, I lean on others, that these are great mindful activities, and the importance of these affirmation comments and refocusing days. And I can tell that you had us captivated, Yvonne, because I've rarely hosted a session when nobody's left, and nobody left.
Okay, now I don't have to obsess on that at 5 minutes.
No, it was
why did people
wonderful.
leave? Why do you know? Oh, I like that, Debbie. Dig into your garden. I can relate to that. I can relate to that. I want to say that the other thing that I've done is I learned over this COVID was I love photography. I have some great photography equipment that I hardly ever get to use. And so I decided I'm going to use it. I've now started photographing dogs in different neighborhoods in San Antonio. And so it's just you can find, I just have some great pictures of dogs. And so I just think that works. Yeah, there's something about digging in the dirt. You're right, Debbie, there is. Well, and more importantly, I think that anytime that we can give ourselves a reminder of refocusing on ourselves and taking that time, because a whole day can go by and you're like, gosh, I didn't even, make this phone call to get my dentist appointment done, to go to a dentist appointment. And you think, I need to get that done. And so I think it's important to also consider that you have to make time for yourself. You have to make time for yourself. I've tried to start doing that when you think of your students, when you think of all the work they have to do, when you think of your colleagues, when you think of meetings that are back to back to back. I think I've seen some faculty and leaders and staff start to end at 5 minutes to the hour, which works really well for me. But I think that that's really important to also keep in mind so that we can just kind of step away for a minute, get some fresh air, play a video game, read a book, whatever it is that you can do. And remember our students as we think about this resiliency and any ideas that you can provide for them, suggestions you can provide for them to build their resilience, I think is important. Sally, Deb, any other thing I'm missing here?
I just want to remind people that the recording, I'm going to go back and listen to this. The recording, will be available once we get everything uploaded and downloaded. And I'm just seeing so many positive things in the chat that I think you really touched on something that a lot of us have experienced and continue to experience.
I often hear people say, it'd be great if you gave us a list of things to consider, but I've started to see in just the research that so much of this is individual. So much of it is really our own. You probably don't even recognize you do it. I used to tell people the reason Philo made it through the back is because he doesn't have a cerebral cortex in the backyard. He's not using his brain like we are. We're going to think about a million reasons why it's so hard to move and why it's so hard to be in a new home and all of these things. And so it slows us down. And, so I think that, with Philo, he just made it happen, and he's gone now, but I really wish that he was definitely the leader of our pack here. And so I think he had a message to give us all. But thank you guys, and continue to enjoy the TLC